Waiting for it to. All right. Thank you everyone for coming back, and joining us for the second session. Just again, as a reminder, I mean, if you do have some questions from the previous session that you thought of since then, feel free to ask and pose those questions as well, because I'll be happy to go through those or any other questions that you may have thought of, since yesterday. But just to continue on, and let me just actually, just go for a quick overview of what some of the stuff that we talked about, right? So our focus was with cybersecurity for a tool for journalists, and reminding you in terms of what are some of the key areas that you need to look for in terms of cyber risks. Because cyber risks, you need to be aware of what is going on out there, what's going out in the world, because there's different threats that occur, and they can occur against different types of environments or different types of sectors. But the key thing is to know exactly what's going on within your own environment, so that way you can better protect it, right? So that's why it's important, again, know what you have, right? You can't protect anything that you don't know about. If you're not aware of what you're running on your systems or what kind of applications, who has access, things like that, it's going to be difficult to protect it, and it opens up to you to various vulnerabilities. So a key thing is to first start off with knowing what you have. Once you know what you have, then remember, you're going to go and update those defenses. Or you're going to make sure that you have updates and patches set up on those systems, right? You don't want to just take a laptop or a desktop or mobile device and just use it straight right out of the box, right? You want to make sure you have a secure password. You want to make sure that it has the latest patches and updates set to it, rather than waiting. It may take you time to go through that whole update process, but at least that way that your system is much more secure than when you started off, and then you're better protected. So updating your defenses, turn on auto update, make sure everything on your system. Again, regardless of whether it's a laptop, mobile device, so tablets, smartphones, those also need to be updated to the latest operating system, and all the apps that are running on that system need to be updated. But then make sure also remember to have a strong password, right? Unfortunately, in most cases, and actually many cases, you have no choice but to use a password. So when you're using that password, make sure that it's something that is strong, right? And we talked a little bit about yesterday. So typical recommendation is to have 8 characters. So alphanumeric, uppercase, lowercase type password, or a passphrase. Someone mentioned that. Right, a passphrase is maybe actually better than having a password, because that's a little bit more difficult to remember, or even using a different language. Again, another person mentioned that, maybe have your password in a different language that you're maybe learning, or that of, and maybe use 3 different words each in a different language. But again, remember, it shouldn't have anything to do with you. Right? Not something that you can answer in a question, like, what is your pet name? What's your anniversary? What's your birthday? Nothing that's on social media that somebody can find and potentially use to gain access to your accounts. But then also implement 2-factor authentication, right? Make sure you have some sort of token in place. Most people are now shifting to that biometrics with face and fingerprint recognition, which is fine. But, my personal recommendation is you try to use the tokens instead. So the token is that, like Google Authenticator, or it can have a physical token in which the numbers on that token are rotating anywhere between 30 seconds to a minute. And that better protects it. And the reason why, again, remember, with passwords, someone could potentially at some point in time break it, but then having the 2-factor on top of it makes it much more difficult for the attacker to get access to your account. They may get your password, but in order to actually get into the account, they have to supply that those 6 digits or alphanumeric token or whatever type of system that you're using in order to actually get into the account itself. Right, and then you also have to remember there's other external sources that users have to be aware of about phishing and malware. Right, there are technical mechanisms that you can use to protect against phishing and malware. So like antivirus is something that you're going to have on all your devices, right? So whether a mobile device should still have it, regardless of what type of device, an Android or iPhone, you should have antivirus on there. Same with laptops, a Mac, Apple machine, a Windows machine, or Linux machine, doesn't matter. Have some sort of antivirus system on there with the latest updates, the latest signatures, so that way it's up to date and it's going to protect you against potential malware, at least known malware that's out there, right? And then with phishing, again, there are techniques to technical mechanisms to protect yourself against it. But a key thing with phishing is going to be to educate your users. Let users know what phishing is, why phishing is bad, what to look for in these types of phishing things. It's going to be difficult, because they're getting more and more sophisticated and much more accurate in terms of how they're sending and displaying the information in that email. But you need to let people know, don't just go clicking on any links, especially from sources that you're not sure of, and always question, like if a bank or some sort of external resource is asking for information that you wouldn't expect them to ask for. So phishing and malware is going to be something that's very important to focus on. So those are the things that we talked about yesterday. So really quick overview of those items and those things from yesterday. So we're going to talk about here now in the remainder of this session here is we're going to talk about 3 items. And the first item is backup and recovery. Right? Because now you have everything's hopefully updated, everything is patched, everything's up to the latest and greatest, everything is being protected. Now you want to make sure you have some way of recovering those systems in case something does happen to it, right? So, some sort of damage to a machine, some sort of, whether it's accidental or intentional, is going to have an impact on your organization, or on your own, right? Because if that laptop were to go down, meaning like completely damaged, you've lost all your resources, you lost all of your information at that point, especially if you're just relying on making sure that laptop is up and running. Or if you're in an organizational environment, you may have like a file storage system where everything's being stored, but there's a risk that those servers and systems can be damaged or destroyed in some way. So you have to ask yourself, if you lose your laptop for a day or 2 or 3 days, what's the cost? What's the impact on your business? What's the impact on reaching a specific deadlines if that system were no longer available to you? Right? If it gets infected with ransomware, do you pay the ransom or do you have some way of recovery? And that's where backups are going to come into play. Right? So if you could not use IT for a day, if you lost your research, lost important leads, where are things being taken into account or being held because of a ransom or anything like that. But remember, it's not only just phishing or malware or anything like that. That could be causes for some things like this. It could be just, their computers, right? They are going to fail at some point in time, right? Just due to age. I mean, if you have a laptop for 5, 6, 7 years, some point in time, it is going to start wearing out, right? The hard drive at some point is going to fail. It could be human error. Somebody accidentally deleted something and they emptied out their trash. Now, how do you recover that? How do you get back that information? Someone steals your laptop. Someone steals your USB device, right? Environmental damages could be a reason as well, depending on which region you're in, right? If you're in a region where there's a lot of flooding and your laptop happens to be on the floor where the floor that's being flooded, that can cause an issue, right? Tornadoes, hurricanes, heat, really, honestly, even dry heat or a huge amount of humidity and heat can potentially cause damage and wear and tear on a computer as well. So environmental has a factor as well. So that's why backups are very important, right? Because your backup is going to be your means to be able to recover back your systems, right? So even if my laptop were to get damaged, I can restore it, put in the operating system, put everything up to date, but then restore all the files and folders I need because I have it stored in a backup. Right. In some cases, the backup could be the entire system as a whole. So all you have to do is reinstall the operating system and then put everything back from the actual backup that you have and restore everything from that backup. Now, there are different types of backups that you have. You have offline backups and you have online backups. Right. So offline backups is basically where you're storing it onto an external type device. Right. So something that's, once you perform the backup, now you can just remove it from your system and put it into some location, into a nice separate secure location. So it's separate from your device, but it's completely offline. So some people use USB drives, people use like large external drives which they connect to their systems and do it that way. And the nice thing is that you always have it available. You pretty much always have it available with you, right? In some cases, if you have a laptop, you'll carry the external backup drive with you, right? Or you may not carry it with you. You may have left it at home. But with these external and offline backups, what you can do in this case is you can use the built-in operating system's backup software in order to do the backup. You don't have to purchase anything special, right? On an Apple, right, you have Time Machine. So Time Machine you can set up as long as the drive is connected to the machine, it can do the backups for you, and it can actually do automatic backups for you. Right, so now that's cheap, and it's also going to be fast, right? Because it's a connected device to your system, and you don't have to have an internet connection in order to do that, right? Because you're connecting the device physically to your system, right? Windows also has an automatic backup capability as well. And then in these, you can define what specifically you want to back up. Do you want to back up every single file and folder on your system, or do you only want to do select files and folders on your systems? But the negative aspects to this are, it's going to be, are you always going to have the external drive with you? Are you going to remember where you may have placed it, right? Because when you're carrying it around as well, so if you're carrying your laptop and the external drive happens to be in the same bag, and that bag is stolen, you've lost everything again, right? But the idea is that you need to keep the two, like the laptop and the external device, in separate locations. So that way, in case you lose one, you still have the other one, right? And then you always have to have the external device. So if you happen to leave home and just have your laptop and something happens to your laptop and you left your external device back home in a safe, you can't do anything until you get back home, and recovery is going to be much more difficult in that kind of situation. And you still have to take into account environmental factors as well with that physical device, right? Because I've seen cases where people have taken those external devices, put them into a safe, even though they're fire-resistant safes. The heat itself of the safe and the fire around the safe actually ended up melting some of the hard drives. Yeah, it should take a lot of heat, but this was like a consistent, pretty strong fire to do that. And so it caused a little bit of damage to the hard drives as well. So those are things you have to take into account. Even with flooding, even though it's a safe, right? Water can still, in some cases, get into that safe. So make sure that safe is in a high location where it doesn't get wet. So these are things you have to worry about with offline. But then there's also online. So online is where you're actually using like a cloud backup. So you're storing it somewhere else, right? It's not a physical device that you're connecting to your system, but it's some sort of internet connected system or device. So something that's on the cloud, right? So technically in an office, right? And if you're in an office organization environment, you plug in your laptop, it could automatically back up to the servers that are there. So that could be considered an online backup, right? But typically then the idea is that data is really stored somewhere else. It's somewhere off-site in a secure location. The cloud service providers are implementing their own security measures on there. So the nice thing about this is that regardless of where you are, as long as you have an internet connection, your laptop or your system is always being backed up, right? So it's always being backed up. Once you're offline, then that's a different situation. But as soon as you're connected back onto the internet and back online again, it will automatically back up anything that you have that needs to get backed up on your system. So it's a little bit quicker recovery in essence, because that means you don't have to be home. You can be somewhere, outside or traveling a different location, go to your local computer store, get the laptop fixed, and then just put in everything that you need to put in order to recover the files and folders that were lost. Right. But the negativity about it is that, hey, you have to be connected to the internet. So if you're in a location where you can't connect to the internet, or there's restrictions on where you can connect to on the internet, that could potentially cause an issue in this type of situation. Spacing could also be limited because you have to pay for it at this point, right? Because in most cloud service providers, you have to pay for it. They'll give you free storage, but only to a certain extent, right? They're not going to give you unlimited storage. Right, I know with Google Workspace, they give you, depending on which level of that you purchase, the minimum I believe is about 30 gigs per user. right? And that may not be enough for all the users because that typically also includes mail, not just files and folders, right? So your cost could, and not all these online backups are free. And most of the ones that are free are very limited with capabilities. And then you do have to eventually pay for, like, iPhone cloud services, right? iCloud. You have free up to an extent, but once you reach that limit, they could ask you to increase it, but there's a cost in terms of increasing it. And this could take backing up the system could take a long time, especially right off the get-go. Right. So if you have a lot of things on your system and files and folders, and you decide to get a new backup system, put in that backup, it can take longer to do that initial backup. Right. It could take a couple hours depending on how much information that you have on there. Because you're relying on your internet connectivity to do these backups. So if you have large files, if you have videos, things like that, those things could take time and slow down your internet connection as well. But in most cases, when it comes to do these online backups, once the initial backup is done, same with the offline backups. Once the initial backup is done, the way you can set it up is to only files and folders that are new or have been updated get backed up, rather than having the entire machine backed up. Right. So that way it's you're just backing up new things and modified things, files and folders on your system. And that's that will at least reduce and make it a little bit of a speedier backup. But then you do have to recover it, right? Remember, in terms of recovery, now you have to download all these files and folders off the internet, off of your cloud service provider. So that could take some time, depending on how much and how many files and folders that you have in your backup on the cloud service provider. But backups are very important. Backups are a key thing to recover against a lot of different types of attacks, especially like ransomware, right? Because this way, ransomware, is completely locking out your machine. And typically, even if they pay a ransom, you're going to have to restore your machine in some way. So if you have a backup, hopefully you don't have to pay the ransom. Then at that point, you just wipe your machine, restore everything back onto that machine at that point, and you should be back up and running. But as long as your backup is up to the latest day, the worst case scenario is that you may have a day-old backup, right? And that's fine. You lose at least maybe a day's worth of information, but that's better than losing weeks or years worth of information and then having to pay a ransom on top of that. So now so we're using KQED as our example here. So in this case here, they're relying on each individual to be responsible for their systems. Right, we had mentioned that each individual is the admin on their laptop. They were responsible for updating their systems. They're responsible for patching. They're making sure that antivirus was up to date, or even had an antivirus on those systems. So before the attack even happened, everybody had their own process to back up and store data. Right, so they were responsible for backing up anything that they thought was critical, or anything that they were thought of as important, or maybe they didn't even consider a backup. Right, they may just think, okay, you know what, it's on a laptop. What's the chances of anything happening to this? It should be minimal. I've had this machine for 6 months, or I've had this machine for 2 years. It's been going strong. Why would I need to back it up? Right, and the other thing is that some people on the staff were using their own personal Google Drives and other cloud-based storages to store information, which, depending on the situation, so if you're a freelancer, this is fine, right? Because this is your own, or you're basically your own boss, and you can go and put things on your personal drive or cloud-based storage devices. But if it's part of an organization, do you really want your staff putting confidential or organizational documentation onto their own personal drives? Right, and then each department is responsible for the backups, and they were not very frequent. So like it says here, they were too infrequent to be useful. So these were like weeks old, they're probably months old, or maybe never even backed up at this point. Right, so backup software was considered an unnecessary expense. So you think about it. Now they got hit by ransomware. If they didn't have backups of their appropriate information, what can they do? How are they going to recover at this point? Right, the most that they could do is probably wipe the machines, put in the new operating system, make sure they're fully patched, and install some applications. but think about all the files and folders and years worth of information that was collected, right? Sources and, sources that they were using, articles that they had written, or they may have been spending years on, and that all that information potentially being lost. So from a security consultant that worked on the KQED case, a quote from the article is that if you're backing up on a daily basis or even on a weekly basis, you back up to before the known infection and you cross your fingers. Right. So if you know when the infection happened on that day, if you had a daily basis, backed up on a daily basis, you can go back to the previous day. So at least you can restore that information and you haven't lost any data. Worst case is that if that's when the infection occurred, you just go to the day prior to that, and the day prior to that, until you find the one that doesn't have the infection on it. But the backups are going to be important because that's going to be your quickest way to get back up and running in your environment without losing any data or losing any information. So any questions about backups and recovery? Oh, another thing that's important too, test your backups and recovery, because I've seen cases where backups can get corrupted because for some reason, especially the ones that are cloud-based, for some reason files didn't get transferred over correctly or data didn't get transferred over correctly. So it's a good idea to test your recovery, make sure that the files and folders actually did get backed up correctly. So do it, do those tests often, maybe once a quarter, just check it out, make sure all the files and folders are correct. Because some backup strategies will let you open the files and folders within the cloud, so you don't actually have to download it or restore it in some cases. So how to better protect a lost backup drive. So this is going to be something that we're going to talk about a little bit in the next one too. Is a key thing is that make sure your backups are encrypted, right? So this way, even if you lose it, they have to get the encryption key in order to be able to view any of the data that's on that drive, right? Otherwise, to them, all they're going to do is like, okay, I can't understand or see anything on that drive. They're going to basically just wipe it. They're just going to wipe the drive, and then you don't have to worry about them trying to look at your data or see your data at that point. That's probably the best way to protect a backup drive. You should always you should always have it encrypted. And losing it, I mean, that's going to be the tough part. Maybe there's all these different things that you can put out there, like tags and tiles and stuff like that have like Bluetooth or like range technology, that if that drive is really that critical, you can always add these tags to it that you can help you go out and search for it via your phone. But in most cases, people say if they lose the backup drive, that's fine. It's encrypted. It's a loss, but but we have to take into account what's on that drive and what actions you need to take in case that drive, for somehow they happen to be able to decrypt it. Does it have confidential data on it? Does it have customer data on it? Does it have financial information on it? So that way your team is better prepared. So there's going to be a lot of policy-based items as well that you have to take into account with losing like a backup drive or something like that. All right, so let's go on to encrypt your data. So encrypting your information is going to be important. So what is data encryption? It's basically taking your data and putting it through a process in which it's taking it from a readable format and putting it into an encoded format. So that way, if somebody tries to open it and they don't have the right keys or tools to open it, they're going to see gibberish. They're not going to be able to, it's not legible to them in any way or format. Right. And the only way that you can really read it is honestly not by using a certain tool, but also having the keys in order to reverse the process. Right. So there's going to be things like, and going a little bit more technical, right? You have private key, public keys, right? You use your private key to encrypt the data, and the person who you want to be able to see the data would have the public key. But in most cases, when it comes to your own laptop and your own system, you're just going to have that private key, and you're using your own private key to be able to open and be able to see that data on there. So that private key is going to be stored in a secure location, or I mean, it'll be on your system itself, but it's going to be in an area where it's going to be hidden and somebody is not able to be able to find it on your systems. But why you want to encrypt is because key thing is protects your data from unauthorized access and distribution, right? Because if someone were to take your laptop or someone were to steal that backup drive of yours, you don't want them to be able to just basically be able to plug in that hard drive or that backup into any type of system and be able to see it. But if you have it encrypted, and when some backups will do that, they'll have that encryption mechanism built into it. You just have to make sure it's enabled or turned on. Even if they plug that in, they're not going to be able to see, and they're going to just see gibberish, and they're going to have to work hard to try to decrypt it. And it's going to be very difficult for them to go through that entire process of doing it. In most cases, people are not going to spend the time to do that because it could take weeks or months, depending on the encryption level and the algorithms and things like that. So they're going to most likely just say, okay, well, this drive is useless. I can't see any data, so I'm just going to wipe it and sell the hard drive for whatever they can get, whatever money they can get for it. Right? It authenticates the data you receive is from a trusted source, right? Because you can actually send encrypted files, right? You can send encrypted email by using different encryption mechanisms. And then that's where the whole private key and public key comes into play. So you have the private key, whomever you're sharing this information with or sending this data to will have the public key, right? And you have to make sure that that private key is in a safe and stored in a safe location so that no one can see it. And you only give the public key to people that you trust. So this is why it's important to do it, because then attackers can't, like in email messages, they can't read those messages. They can't modify the data, right? And secure channels, like if you're using things like Signal, right? That's encryption, end-to-end encryption. They're not gonna be able to read anything unless they're part of that channel, or you let them into that channel. And they can't modify data. They can't intercept the data, because if they try to intercept the data and they make any changes to it at the other end, they're not gonna be able to read it because it's been modified. Because there have been changes that occurred and changes that happen at this point. So what should you encrypt as well? Because that's something that you do have to take into consideration and think about. Oops. Really, like it says here, you should encrypt any and everything that has a potential to harm you, your clients and your business. Right? Anything that you feel is confidential, anything that you need to keep safe and secure, you should encrypt. Financial data, and from a journalist perspective, your sources, your contacts, right? You want to keep that data encrypted and you want to keep that data safe and secure. You don't want anyone just coming in and taking your laptop and being able to say, okay, oh, here, I found all your sources now, right? Because your laptop will be encrypted, your laptop will be protected, then you can use that. So like Windows and Macs have built-in file encryption mechanisms. Turn them on, right? And utilize those capabilities within there. You do have to enable it in most cases, right? So that way, then once you just enable it once, that means everything on that system is now encrypted, right? So you don't have to worry about doing individual files or individual folders. I mean, you could always take it further by using further encryption mechanisms, right? So if you want to really just encrypt it completely so that even if you open it, you can't really see what's in there until you supply either like the appropriate key or like a particular passphrase or password to actually open it and force it to be decrypted. That's another option as well. Some people will take it to that level, right? Because you want to, the laptop is going to have a username and password. Someone has your username and password. Now they can see all the files and folders in there. So you take that additional level of encryption if you need to. Right. So you should have, and then that'll get you in that habit. At least this way, if you do the built-in encryption mechanisms, at least that way it's protected. Someone steals your laptop, they don't have your username and password, but they can't just take the hard drive and connect to the hard drive itself because the entire hard drive is encrypted at that point. Also, when it comes to encryption, there are devices as well. So like USB devices, you can actually purchase USB devices that are going to be encrypted by default as well. So any data that's on there is automatically encrypted. In some cases, you have to have a specific key in order to be able to access the USB device as well. So in terms of encryption practices, when it came to KQED, So they were fortunate enough to have a lot of PII and donor data stored offsite in an encrypted database. So they were lucky in that case. So this protected them by having that in place. So all that data stored somewhere else. It was encrypted. They didn't have to worry about someone stealing that kind of information, kind of data, unless they actually had access to the offsite or access to that encrypted database. Right? Different departments that use encrypted cloud-based web hosting and backup storage were unaffected by the ransom. That's assuming as long as they had that in place. Data that hadn't been encrypted had to be deleted for fear of reintroducing the virus into the network, right? Because they don't really know which file it was that caused the infection. You know, what was downloaded, and even if they found the file that used to cause the infection, what other files did it infect and potentially infect? So that way, if they open up another file, then now the infection starts over again. Right. So there could be a good chunk of information that was potentially lost because of this. So from the KQED security consultant, and so the consultant that worked on this, so the cloud certainly is a strategy that a lot of small organizations employ because it's a lot of work to keep your systems patched. That being said, you're now in a very deep trust relationship with someone else, right? You need to make sure that those cloud service providers are doing some level of encryption, that they have some layer of security and level of security in there, because you are going into a deep trust relationship with them, right? You know, your Android phone, the photos you're taking automatically getting stored onto Google Photo. You're trusting Google to make sure that your Google Photos is secure and encrypted. If you're, Google Drive, you're making sure things are secure and encrypted. For Mac or iPhone, your iCloud, making sure that Apple's actually keeping it secure, protected, and encrypted the data on their end. Right? Because they could potentially get hacked, right? They could potentially be attacked, and that's where the data is. So they need to have that, and you can look for those kinds of things on that information. And when you're going into contracts or you're going into agreements with these different types of parties, ask them about these kinds of things. Are you using encryption? What security mechanisms are you using before, because that way you have that trust level in there. Like apps on the tools, they should tell you that kind of information. You should be able to find that company and look for that kind of information as well. So encryption is going to be important, but encryption is going to take some time, right? So in some cases, depending on the situation and what types of tools are you using. So what are the practical applications of encryption? What are some of the apps we can use to encrypt it? And what are some of the online platforms we can use for encryption? So it depends on what kind of tools. There's a lot of tools that are out there in terms of what you're trying to encrypt. So like on a Mac, right, you have File Vault. Like File Vault is built in. It's not always turned on by default when you get it out of the box, right? And in an organizational wide, there are mechanisms that they can use that when the laptop is turned on, they can remote management and everything turns it on. But when you just go to the Apple Store and purchase a MacBook, you have to actually enable File Vault. It does not turn it on. Windows also has something that's built in. So that way it doesn't. And I would say in a business case scenario, honestly, even in a personal level, turn that on, right? Because even at a personal level, you're going to have things on there that you want to keep confidential. You want to keep to yourselves. You have photos, family photos, that are on there. You're probably going to have like tax type information or financial type information that you're storing on there, right? Those files that are on there, you want to keep those encrypted. You want to keep those secure because you have them on your laptop. You may not necessarily have them stored on the Google Drive or somewhere, on the iCloud basis. But then you also look at applications that have built-in encryption, right? So like apps. So people were asking about, yesterday somebody mentioned the Pegasus. With the spyware, right, that was on the Israeli app, right? So that doesn't really provide any level. It may have been encrypted, but they're still spying on it. So that's not really, is it really truly encrypted communication? Whereas something like, WhatsApp, people got concerned as soon as that news came out about that, data potentially being monetized and sold. And then, with Signal, end-to-end encryption. Say end-to-end encryption, but then what's the reputation of it and who's going to actually use it? And so online platforms in terms of specific encryption, again, it depends. Different drives will do different things. Like Google Drive says they have anything that you put up there is encrypted. So you're trusting them that it's encrypted, right? Same with iCloud. This is going to be encrypted. You're trusting them to be encrypted. Some of these tools out there, like I can't remember the name, I just lost it. Something, I think it's like Oak Tree Spider or something like that. That enables let you choose the encryption levels and things like that. So countries like Russia, China, and encryption legislation regarding importing encrypted laptops, does the same apply to encrypted backup drives? Most likely. Most likely, because then that's where you're going to find out, especially as a journalist, when you're traveling to different locations in different countries, there's going to be different laws and regulations that you're going to have to deal with. So I mean, when you bring in a laptop to these different countries, they may ask you to turn on the laptop. Right, they may ask you to turn on the laptop, or they may actually take it from you to be able to do things to it, right? And if it's encrypted, they may ask you to log into it, and show them what's on here and what kind of things were being used for this. And it's going to be the same. Yeah, I would imagine it would be the same to encrypted backup drives. So this is where you have to be careful and be questioning yourselves: what do you actually want to take with you to these different locations? Right? Do you need to take your encrypted backup drive with you? Do you need to have do you really need to have a laptop? Is your mobile device enough where that's, there's nothing on their mobile device that's going to be incriminating or that's going to, force them to take it from you, right? That you can use it. And there's also going to be, they're also going to be worried, they're going to go as far in some cases, be worried about how you're securely communicating as well. Right? Because places like China do have restrictions on VPN usage. Right? Even though I know there are people in China that do use VPNs, but they are supposed to be, but they can restrict you from connecting. Might be some workaround or something that they're doing there, but there are issues in terms of actually using VPNs capabilities in these different locations. So even secure communication is going to be an issue in some of these regions, and you do have to be wary of that type of what you're using. You may not be allowed to use a VPN or be able to connect to certain VPNs because they don't want that encrypted channel and encrypted communication in place. Right. So that kind of goes on to this part about communicating securely. And what does that mean? Right. So you're determining that whatever tools you're using for communication is whether it's public or private. Right. What's considered public, what's considered private. And then, and again, that could become legislation or regulations depending on the country as well. What they consider public and what they consider private. And it could be different for a journalist. They may say, okay, for journalists, it may be okay, but where does that stop and where does that end? And who or what kind of journalist are you? Are you supportive or are you unsupportive of government entities? So that could potentially, dictate how you're going to handle communications and things like that. Who's your audience? Who are you talking? What are you sharing? What are you sharing? Are you sharing things that are positive? Or are you sharing things that are negative? Things like that. Right. And as a journalist, you're going to want to use a verified encrypted end-to-end communication. Right. Because you want to make sure that whomever you're communicating with, when you're communicating with your source, that there's a trust between the two sides, right? You want to make sure that communication is secure on an secure channel, so that way no one else is sneaking and no one else is determining what's going on. Right, but you have to be wary of this as well, because there could be some issues when it comes to applications that are just bad applications. Right, and then it goes again back to the regulation aspect of it. And even some of these tools that are doing end-to-end communication, there's still some level of regulation against things like hate speech, disinformation, impersonation. Right, social media right now is cracking down on these kinds of things. Right, because like if you're on Instagram or Facebook, they now have this little thing saying, for better information about COVID, go to these, go look at this, depending on what region you're in. right? So see what those components and what those applications can allow you to do. If you can do things like what they call a digital signature. And what a digital signature is a verification mechanism that you can use to say that this is who I am, right? So it is using encryption mechanisms in terms of the digital signature. So if that digital signature changes or altered in any little bit, the other end, and when they look to verify it, they're going to say, okay, no, this isn't you. And digital signatures is something that you want to consider using, because that's, again, you're verifying the identity of yourself to your source, and you can have your source use it so that way that you can verify the identity of your source. So this way you know you're not communicating with somebody who you're not supposed to be communicating with, or somebody is not intercepting your messages and it's intercepting your communications. But you do have to be careful, because some apps may not be allowed to be used in certain jurisdictions. Right. And there are going to be countries like, like somebody mentioned, like Russia and China as examples, that they could say, okay, you know what, these certain apps can't be used. Right. And a lot of countries are starting to do that. Like, just to take one, like TikTok, right? So a lot of countries, because TikTok, they were worried about TikTok stealing information and privacy issues and privacy concerns around TikTok. So a lot of countries started banning it. Right. So, check the legal use of it. I mean, especially with encrypted and secure applications that are out there, they may say, okay, you know what, you have this app on here, you're not allowed to use this app, or they may even block the app completely from access. So even if you have the app on your phone or on your laptop, they may just block that traffic and prevent it from actually connecting to those servers that are used, that particular app uses. You want to have secure, ideally you would want to have secure and private internet connections. So there's virtual private networks, VPNs, right? So the idea behind the VPN is that you're connecting to a remote server and all your communications are going securely through that remote system, right? So all the traffic that's in there should be fully encrypted, right? And then it also makes it look like it's coming from a different source rather than your actual location, right? So even though I might be in the United States, by using a VPN, I can say that I'm located in France, or I'm located in Belgium, or I'm located in South Africa, depending on that tool. So the IP and all the information is going through the servers in that location. Right, and the goal of the VPNs is really to protect your online privacy and make sure that is more difficult for any attackers to intercept your data, or not, take your data and define where it's going and how things are being sent, and intercepting that kind of data. But again, you're relying on your VPN service provider to make sure that the encryption channels are in place, that the communications are being done securely, that they themselves are not collecting data and monetizing that data and selling that data. But as mentioned before, people say, like, I know in China I believe they don't allow VPNs at all in that location. I could be wrong on that, because I haven't kept up with all the regulations and legislations that are out there. But there are going to be countries but that's fine. I mean, even if you're not allowed to use a VPN, remember, using things like HTTPS, or the padlock that's on there, that is technically an encrypted channel. Right. So even if you don't have a VPN, there are still secure mechanisms, like connected to specific websites, that you can only communicate with them over secure channels. Otherwise, they won't allow you to allow for that communication to occur. Right. So those are things that, so even if you don't have the VPN, just make sure you go to secure sites, utilize secure sites, utilize tools that allow for secure communications, and hopefully those secure communications will be allowed into a specific location in a specific area. So there are still ways around VPN. You don't have to have a VPN, because you're going to see a lot. There's different opinions about a VPN. Do you really need to use a VPN now? You can still use a VPN, but is it absolutely necessary? Depends on where you're going, what you're accessing, and what you're visiting. So in the case of KQED, right? So before the attack, again, all devices were integrated into the same network and also handled calling and email storage, right? So everything, desktop, laptops, everything was on there. A more secure email service is considered too expensive, right? So they probably used the basic system that probably didn't have any encryption mechanisms or any secure communication mechanisms in place. right? So during the attack, reporters depended on text messages and their personal cell phones. So everything had to be on their cell phones. Like, email was down at this point. Encrypted chat platforms like Slack entered the newsroom during and after the attack. And in-person meetings and physical notes were reintroduced for important communications because they didn't have secure channels to communicate things over. So they didn't have something like Slack. So Slack is just so if you haven't used Slack before, Slack is just it's another messaging tool that you can use internal within your organization. Right. So again, from the KQED security consultant, based on everything that they worked on, it says we would be well advised as a community to figure out a way to talk about these things without shame. We need to learn from them collectively. And what this person is basically means by saying something like this is that, we need to be able to learn from other people's mistakes. Instead of shaming KQED, like, I can't believe you weren't secure. I can't believe you didn't take these things into account. They probably didn't know. Right? They probably weren't aware of some of these things. They probably didn't have the right people in place that were, thinking of these kinds of things, because they were thinking about what do we need to do to make sure our journalists are able to do what they need to do. Our anchors are able to do what they need to do. The information was easily accessible and easily handled. Right? So, instead of shaming KQED, we should be thankful to them for sharing this information and be willing to share this information. So that way other groups can learn from their mistakes and say, okay, you know what, this happened to someone like them and they're a small size organization like we are. We need to go and listen to, fix everything that the mistakes that they made and do that and implement it on our end. So this is a good thing that they did, actually, in terms of being able to freely share that information and publicly share this information so other people knew what to do and what actions that they can take with this. So I know there's some questions here, so I'm just giving you some additional resources that are available to you, and we'll still go through some questions and have some level of discussion if we can. But just as a reminder, the GCA Cybersecurity Toolkit for journalists that's available to you is the gcatoolkit.org/journalist. So this site will actually give you all the tools that you actually need and that you can use. So, what are specific tools that, we're recommending based on not only GCA's recommendation, but also recommendations from actual journalists, right? So our advisory group that we have consists of journalists from freelancers to organizational level journalists, and what tools that they use and what tools they know that are secure, secure tools to help journalists, at every level. And there's also resources there as well that will help you, maintain that good cyber hygiene in your environment. We also have a community forum, and that community forum is where you can post questions. You can ask for advice about specific tools. You can make suggestions about different tools, and you have access to subject matter experts. And this is free to use. So both of the toolkit's free. The community forum is free to use. The community forum, you do have to register. That's just so we can control, what people are saying to some level, because we want to make sure that anyone who's on the community forum is not selling you something. So that way, if you're asking a question, they're answering your question and not trying to sell you a product or sell you a tool. And then we also have a learning portal as well. So this is where you can go in and learn more about cybersecurity. You can, test your knowledge on there. And I believe this is, we partnered with Totem to actually have that data and that information. So this is actually catered towards journalists. And the focus is around journalists, not just cybersecurity in general, but catered to journalists and the things that journalists need to focus on. All right, so questions and discussions. So we have quite a lot of time to be able to go through, and I can go through and take a look at your questions and answer them to as best as I can. So how can non-repudiation be used to create surety in data transmission? This is where you're really trusting the tools that you're using in terms of transmitting data. So like if you're using email, for example, you're trusting that your email service provider is actually going to use a high level of security. and high level security mechanisms to allow, that the messages are actually being sent back and forth. Use read receipts, things like that. Whether, again, now the difficulty again is still going to be is like, how do you know that the person you're talking to is the actual person that you're supposed to be talking to? And that's where things like digital signatures come into place, right? So there are tools and mechanisms that you can use that are like, if you're using Gmail, for example, there are tools that you can use that are built in there that that can allow you to create these digital signatures. And what it does, it takes the keys that are associated with them and puts them on the cloud, and then people can, they can transmit and share the keys in that sense. But again, you're also making sure that you have, the email address of the person you're communicating with is the actual and correct email address that you're supposed to be using. So it's really a lot of trust involved when it comes to using these third-party tools, especially. How can I have heard of backdoors and encryption? How can one verify that there isn't such in what we use? Honestly, the simplest way to do it is to figure out what tool that you're using and what encryption mechanism that tool uses, and then do a search on it. Because if it has a backdoor associated, somebody is talking about it. Somebody has already mentioned that this is something that has a backdoor on it. Do not use it, or they'll say that they have updated and patched and that backdoor has been fixed. Right. And also, I mean, because if there is something out there that's not encrypted correctly, and there's something out there that has a backdoor to it, they will get shamed and named by the news media. And we've seen that quite a lot, because that's, again, that's what happened, something with like Zoom, right? Zoom had all these different serious issues. And one of the things is that, does it actually provide proper end-to-end encryption? So that was one thing that was called out on that, so they had to, basically go in, make sure and ensure people that, yes, we are using end-to-end encryption. Here's the capabilities, here's the options, here are the things that we're doing. Which is better, VPN or proxy chain? That's a good question. A VPN is going to be a little bit easier to implement and put into place. Proxy chain may not be so easy to do. Secure wise, probably proxy chain will probably be a little bit better than a VPN. But I mean, again, that depends on the situation that you're in and which environment you're in. A proxy chain could probably get around some of the legislations that are out there, but yeah. So it'll be expected that the journalists will be asking us for practical use of digital signature, encryption, VPN, etc. Is there going to be a practical session later for journalists on these things? So actually, I guess the question is, you meaning actual usage of these types of tools? So we don't have anything in terms of actual usage of tools themselves, because there's so many tools that are out there that, our toolkit will have specific tools that we've got as recommendations, again, from freelancers and journalists and things like that they can use, because those, based on a lot of research and talking to the security community, talking to the journalists, that these are the tools that are not only popular, but actually have been known to be better in terms of security aspects of it. I can talk with Kaylee and see if there's something that we can do in terms of giving you like a real world type examples of using these kinds of things, and see what we can do. But yeah, let's take a look at that. I think those were all the questions that I saw.
Hi, can I just quickly unmute and ask? It would be easier this way than on the chat. So just supporting the practical aspect. I've done a lot of like data and technology trainings for folks with different backgrounds, and I really feel like there is a really significant barrier to entry for these kind of tools. So I would really support if you have any approach that you've seen have worked with these kind of tools and getting folks on board and actually, starting playing with it and, just installing, and that really like a very important step for them for actual take up. That would be really useful if you can share any of that.
Yeah, because I know what we've done in the past is, and these were more in person, we've actually had workshops. And with the idea with the workshop was to do something like we're doing now, but we had hands-on sessions because everyone was in the same room and we could actually watch people do it. So they basically, they didn't have to do it, but when they see other people doing it, everyone follows suit. So when they're in the same room and they can ask the question, okay, here, like we would say, what was one of the like for two-factor authentication, we would say, okay, log into your email application, let's set up two-factor authentication. So each person would log on to their like their Gmail, or they log on to their Hotmail or their the Office 365, and then we would go through the process of showing them this is how you actually do it and how you implement two-factor authentication. So that kind of forces them in that sense. The only little bit of issue was that then if you have, depending on the number of people in your room, if you have 15 people in the room and they use 15 different products, it's going to take time to go through that process of showing them how to do it. But at least it gets them started, right? And it gets them going and moving and get them the idea of what they need to do and how they exactly do it. So that's one way you could consider doing it, and having like different workshops around these types of things. But that also might be like a day-long session. Like half a day or a day-long session, depending on how you want to break it up.
Okay, thanks. I think we can discuss what's possible in terms of personal gatherings and and resources. I think online, one option, if there are not too many participants, is doing it in breakout rooms with a facilitator in each room. So just the thing that we can consider. Yep. Thanks.
Yeah, I know the in-person thing is, it's a problem right now. But we've seen success with that. Just to give that in the past, when we did that, we would get small businesses in a room, with about 50 participants, and it actually worked quite well. It's easier to control people in person. Virtually, it might be a little bit harder. But breakout rooms or breakout sessions could potentially work. Yeah. But one recommendation would be to do something like that is to at least, you may want to have a survey to find out what people are actually using, so that way you can cater to those particular users, and have breakout sessions. So if people are using Gmail, they can go to one room. People are using like Hotmail, they go to another room. Because it's the way how you do things is going to be different for each people who are using Windows machines as opposed to Macs, right? They may want you put them in separate rooms, so that way the Mac users aren't waiting for the Windows users to do their thing, and then vice versa. So. Any other questions? Maybe I could take a little time to show the toolkit, maybe. Stop sharing for a second. Show you the toolkit really quick. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen. So when you go to gcatoolkit.org, you can actually be presented with, so if you're going for the first time, you're going to be presented with three different options you can go to. We have a small business toolkit, we have elections toolkit, and we have the journalist toolkit. So, you click on the toolkit that you want to go to. So we'll just show you the journalist toolkit. And with the journal, so here then you can see is basically what we went over and covered over the past few days, right? We went in a specific order of knowing what you have, updating your defenses beyond simple passwords, and so on. right? And we explain to you, what are the different components and different aspects of it. But this is where now you can actually go in here and find out what are the tools that are being recommended, again, by GCA and our journalist advisory committee, to consider using. So you have options. You can either go directly to that particular toolbox, or you can click on here, start using the toolkit. And then if you click on start here, it actually just goes to know what you have. And what usually, again, these toolkits, these toolboxes will have is explain to you, again, knowing what you have. What does it mean? It has short videos to explain, in the simplest terms of why security awareness is important and what are the things that you should be wary of. We have a box here to expand to say, give more information again in terms of why it's important to know what you have. And then below, we'll give you the tools and define some tools that are out there. Like this is a spreadsheet. So they may not actually be like tools in search of like something you set up or a wizard or something like that. These could be simple things as like an Excel spreadsheet you download and fill in all the information. Right. So this tool is what you're going to use to track what kind of hardware you have, what kind of software. It gives you columns so that we can track what information is considered important. You may not use all the columns, but that's up to you to take and adjust as you need. You can go to identify your applications, which may have the same tools in this situation. And then also when you scroll down further, you'll have additional training and resource information. So there may be things like Totem Project, how does the internet work? Things that are relevant to this. And you can either click over here, or you can always click on next to go to the next toolbox or the next tool sets in that particular box, right? So here's like updating your devices and applications. So these are some tools and these are free tools. Auto update in Windows, auto update in Apple, like how to do these, how to update MS Office, for Android, how to do auto updates. Beyond Simple Passwords is going to have different tools that you can consider using. So tools for two-factor authentication, right? And also information on how to set it up on different accounts. So if you're not sure on how to do it, these are instructions on how you can actually go through and do it. Right. And then below we'll have more information like, password managers, a lot of questions about password managers. This is passwordmanager.com actually provides you information about password managers, and they give recommendations of which could be the best password managers. They may not necessarily be the free versions of it, but those are ones that you can consider looking, right? And then creating policies and how to create strong passwords. So we have a lot of information here, how to manage your passwords. So like 1Password for journalists, this is actually free for journalists. Right. So this is one that we put out because it's free, so because journalists, especially for freelance, you're going to have a budget. You may not want to have to go out and pay for something. We wanted to give a free tool that's available to them, and so on. So this is what we kind of went through and provided information on the different types of things that are available, things that are out there that you can consider using. Majority of it is free, or there might be, there's a certain tier or level of free. But then if you exceed those levels, then you may have to consider purchasing or buying those tools. But this is something that you may want to go with your journalists and go through these. So that way you don't have to kind of figure out and look for those tools. Go through this with them. Right. Use this as an example of kinds of things. Here's BitLocker. This is what you need to do to install and set up BitLocker or File Vault to encrypt your systems. Right. Here's some tools that they can use to do secure instant messaging, right? To do email security. So there's these tools that you can use. Securing your browsing, how to make sure that your browsing is secure. So these are all the different types of tools and tool sets that are out there that you can use. You want to consider using, providing to your journalists and letting them know, hey, look, this is what you can do. This is what you can use. Here are some of the tools that are out there that are freely available to you to use. Right, as you can see, I didn't have to register for anything here. These are just anyone and any journalist can go through this at their own pace at any point in time that they want. You can take these toolkits and let them go through this with your journalists that are out, journalist partners, and so on. And the other thing is, this is also where the training portal is. So this detailed training, this is provided by Totem, and this is again specific for journalists. So it's for journalists in partnership with the Free Press Unlimited. You do have to register, I believe, but that then the purpose of registration is so that we can keep track of where you are, right? So that way you log in. If you didn't complete a course, you can always continue on from where that course is. You can track your process and so on. So there's quite a lot of information here. So courses like securing your devices, how to protect your identity, how to keep things private, field researching, desk researching, and so on. Bypass internet censorship, secure passwords, phishing attacks. So we strongly recommend that people go through these courses at your own pace, at your own time. And just so you know too, so here is also our advisory group. So we do have a link to our advisory group, and we show who are all the folks that are part of our advisory group. So it's not just GCA recommending these tools. We have people from Facebook, we have from Digital Forensics Research Lab, Alliance for Security, Democracy, Freedom of the Press Foundation. We have freelance journalists on here, so Associated Press. So we have quite a few people that are in the technology realm as well as in the journalist realm as well. You can also actually submit a tool as well. So if you have recommendations, we're always looking for recommendations, and we go through a process, right? So it's not just you say this is a tool you need to put on here. We go through a whole vetting process. So we have an internal vetting process to first check out the tool, see the capabilities of the tool, see if it makes sense or if it's a duplicate of what we already have. Once we make a decision, we take it to the advisory group, and the advisory group has the input in there as well. Is this a tool that actually does make sense for journalists to have and to implement into the journalist toolkit? So this is something that if any of you have any recommendations, feel free to fill out this form and send it to us by just submitting a tool. So that is the toolkit in a very quick nutshell. Let's go back. So I lost the chat window. Is there any other questions? Where's the chat window? Yeah, so okay, yes, the community forum. Excuse me. Right, so the community forum, you can actually get to the community forum via the toolkit. Is on the left-hand navigation pane. We have here is community forum. This actually goes to a separate site. And this in the separate site, we have actually different types of community discussions that are available to people, depending on what you're looking for. But we have one specific to cybersecurity toolkits. So in the cybersecurity toolkits, you can actually click to each one, and there's conversations going on in terms of, like saying know what you have. So people are attached certain PDFs that give more information. There will be comments in terms of whether people think this is good or maybe if there's something better. And we have that for each category. And you're going to see more categories because we actually do this across all of our toolkits. So you're going to see more categories than just the ones that you're going to see in the journalist toolkit. Like protect your email and reputation, right? So this is more an organizational level item rather than a journalist level item. But that doesn't mean you can't go in and take a look. You can communicate securely. We have things like in terms of where we're actually looking for feedback around Signal. What do people actually think about Signal, or what are some alternatives, right? So here's like people are recommending. We're looking at European alternatives such as Olvid and Citadel. And we'll take a look at those as well. Like, and this occurred more in terms of what happened with the WhatsApp group. But these are, your area to go in and ask any questions that you may have. You can post your own, you can start your own post as you choose. You don't have to, restrict yourselves just to the posts that are currently up there right now. And this is free to use. So, right. So if you want to sign up, you just have to provide your email, put in a username. You can use Facebook, Google, GitHub, or LinkedIn to create your account and log in that way as well. But that's all. So all you ask is for an email and a username and password. Username, your name and your name is optional, and a password, and that's it. We're not asking for any other additional information than that. So that is our community forum. Yeah. Any other questions? Keep using the chat window. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. Kaylee, is there anything else that we need to like to add to wrap up? Or otherwise,
no, I'll be sending a link with a few questions for feedback so that we can improve, or I'll come back with a third session as suggested by Raymond. So I'll send that via email so you can provide feedback for us. Other than that, well, thank you very much for joining the sessions. I think it was great, but I mean, it's only my opinion.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Great session.
all right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.